Hello everyone, it's Farket here, and this is part 2 of the full release update for Sons of the Forest. There's still more parts to come, but let's get into it. Now first, they've added an option to extend the campfire with logs to turn it into a bonfire. This is slightly confusing because to do it, you need to have a stick fire with quarter logs cut up onto it. Then you can add the logs. It doesn't matter if it's got the fire pits around with the stones or the rocks. Takes quite a few logs, and I'm guessing it extends the length of the burn time. I don't know if it attracts enemies or not. Once you do this, so you cannot add anything to it except for leaves. So you can't cook on it, which is fairly obvious. That's not really what a bonfire is for. I didn't check what sort of light it produced. Probably should have done that. They've added a new explosive storage structure. This allows you to store explosives. I think you still can store them on the shelf, but I think this is more of a dedicated structure. Maybe to make them easier to access, or maybe universal storage isn't so great. It can hold Molotovs, bombs, and grenades. Used to be able to hold 10 grenades, now you can only carry 5. Keep that in mind. Next is that they've added an arrow storage structure. This stores all the arrow types, 10 of each, I think. It's quite tedious to put them on as you can only do one at a time. And it's hard to select the arrow because it's so thin. Getting your mouse cursor to hang over it might be a little bit difficult. I think things like this might actually be better if you had a controller. I don't know how this affects arrows that have upgraded with, stun or fire or explosive, etc. Next is that they've added a UI to show the player current strength level, and the player's max strength level has been increased from 50 to 100. This can be seen down the bottom right. Now, strength originally only increased your health. Now they've made additions to it. Each level in strength also increases your melee and chop damage by 1%, which means it could be 100% more by the end of it. And I did testing on some pillars and stuff with 2 strength because I couldn't lower it to 0, and with 100 strength, as well as with an upgraded axe. Now, upgraded fire axe, by the end of it, did 105 damage. Even with buffs from the stew, it didn't increase the damage anymore. It still would increase your tree cutting damage, but 105 damage per hit will kill most cannibals if they don't have armor. This is a massive change, a very good one, because what ended up happening was that melee weapons just became redundant towards the end of the game, and this happened in the forest too, because you could just use headshots for everything. I mean, you still can, but this gives viability to melee again. This is excellent. Using bows and stuff is fine, but it gets repetitive as a means of killing them. I could imagine at 100% with a tree cutting buff, you probably take trees down in 1 or 2 hits. So you don't even need a chainsaw. I'm just guessing that though. Next is a flashlight and shotgun no longer respawn upon loading if you already have them in your inventory. Now there's no solution for the flashlight, nor why does it matter, I don't know, because you can't store it. However, the shotgun is important, so I went and checked it to see how it works. So basically a way around it is that you can just make a weapon storage next to it and then put the shotgun on it, save, reload, and a shotgun will appear. And you can do this as many times as you want, but it's mainly so you can get a shotgun for yourself and one for Virginia. It will also work for multiplayer as well if you want to go down that route. Next is that the buckshot count has been reduced from 15 to 8, and the cone spread has been reduced from 25 to 20. It's narrowed the spread on it, which is going to make it easier to hit things, but it's pretty much half the damage, and they've halved the damage of the shotgun before. So this thing really doesn't slap anymore like it used to. When it first came out, it was like comparable to the super shotgun from Doom 2 or the shotgun from Fear. I played both of those games quite a lot and they slapped. Now this one just doesn't anymore. Though it's not all doom and gloom for the shotgun because they've improved the slugs in the shotgun. Slug ammo will now cause the shotgun to hit react on enemies even if they're armored. So before it just took their armor off and didn't do anything. It was so bad. But now it actually does pretty good. You gotta aim with it though because it's slugs, it's not spread. I've whinged about this a lot. I'm not very good with it. Next is if the bow doesn't have an arrow loaded, but the player has available arrows in his inventory, it will switch to those arrows. This might affect for like explosive arrows or fire arrows because the damage could be spread back to you. But it's better though, because you're in the middle of a fight, you don't really want to be fiddling around with arrows. Next is that the stone storage and sled now carry 28 stones instead of 27, and storage counters are now displayed. But I didn't find this mentioned anywhere in the patch notes. Unless this was from a previous patch, I'm not sure. But now there's a visual counter when you go up to it. I don't know why they increased it by 1. Maybe they wanted an even number. Next is that the taser stick, as they called it, but it's actually a stun baton, now only has 3 charges per battery. This is quite big because batteries before this update were quite rare, and I don't know if they've solved the problem yet. Unless you have cases replenishing, it's actually quite hard to find batteries. There's only one spot I know I was able to get 2 guaranteed every time, and that was near the entrance of the entertainment bunker, where the 3D printer is. It's on a shelf there. But I found no other viable spots for batteries. So batteries in this game are rare. Unless they've fixed it, I don't know. It would be much more useful in multiplayer if one player can stun and the other one whacks him with like an axe or a katana, etc. That's where it would be very viable. This game is more catered to multiplayer than single player if you didn't notice. Next is that rainbows will now show up after it rains. I tested this out and it's not really accurate. They do appear sometimes, but they disappeared really quickly. I was using console commands to try and force it. That might have been an issue. I tried without, it just was hit and miss. I think this is good because it indicates the player when it stopped raining, if they're not focusing while they're playing without sound, for example. Though I just really like this one in general. I like rainbows. Speaking of which, when I was in Norway, on my first day there, after I got off the plane, I went hiking to try and stay awake to beat jet lag, because at this point I'd been awake for like 30 hours. And I managed to catch a rainbow on top of a rainbow, perfectly lined up. I'd never seen anything like it before. I thought it was really cool. I wanted to share that. Next is that they've added options in the custom settings for search parties frequency and building resistance. There's also the creative mode options in there, but I haven't covered that yet. I'm going to cover it later on as it's a bit spoilerish, but I'm assuming this will change the difficulty of the game. At this point with their custom mode settings, I'm starting to think that players would be better off selecting a custom game mode rather than using the default ones. Next is that they've added an extra snow sled to help direct players from the snow crash to the first ice cave. Now, I started a game, I had to do this 12 times before the snow one would start. Very frustrating. But I played as if I was a normal player. I went around, helped Kelvin, picked up the containers and had a quick look around to see if it was noticeable. It was there, but it didn't stand out too much. I went over to it and then I looked around and it's nothing very visible to walk up to there. Maybe if you're very curious, you would. I walked up there anyway. There's a lot of items up there. So if you're new to the game or if you got the snow spawn, make sure you head up here because it's worth it. There is a can opener, which is decent. And there's a whole bunch of items. A little cave that you can go into and there's some items in there as well. Even climbs down into a thing. Yeah, go there. Next is that lakes will now visibly freeze when the player is nearby. This only happens if it's switching over to winter. Now before, if you stayed in the same area, say you were building for days, if it was winter and you didn't leave the area, the lakes and that wouldn't freeze, so you could keep getting water from them. Now that's not the case. It took a while for it to happen, but it did eventually freeze over to a point where I could walk on it. I don't know how realistic that is. I thought it was cool. I don't think water would freeze that fast, but yeah, it's still a game. I did check if the opposite would happen, that if it was in summer or the winter ended, would it unfreeze in front of the player, and it doesn't. This may come at a later time. If you want to unfreeze the water, you just save and reload. Next is that the required items on the user interface for structures is now hidden when the player is in caves or in bunkers. So if you place a blueprint and you go inside a cave, they will disappear. I think this is excellent. It's a very good quality of life thing, because you don't need to see that crap while you're in a cave. I do certainly miss building in caves though. That was a cool feature of the forest. Next is a bit strange. I put it in here just because I thought it was interesting, but they removed the ducking of music in the settings menu. I think it's because the main menu music is no longer quite intense. It's more like relaxed than that. But the ducking helped you concentrate if you're looking through the options. It wasn't as loud. It made you like concentrate better. I think it did. I just thought it was interesting. Next is that they've improved the debug Freecamera system, which now uses the main camera. So assets around it will load properly and it works with the gamepad. This is so if you're trying to get cinematic footage or a good screenshot of your base, yeah, etc. Before, it was absolutely terrible, so it works a lot better now. Basically, what happened was when you went away from your character, all the textures and stuff were really bad quality. They hadn't loaded in properly because the game detected that you weren't near it to improve performance. This is technically the only way to fly-ish. You're not really flying though, it's just a camera. If you want to fly, you've got to use Red Loader, Tony Macaroni's mod. It's got X FreeCam, which allows you to fly around the map. I don't know why a Night won't add flying. The next is that there will be no printer resin by default in printers. Instead, you have to find it and add it. Before, there was usually like 200, maybe 300 in a printer, and you could use that whenever you found one. Now they've all got 0. And what was interesting about this update is that there was so many things added, but there was no 3D printer recipes added. I don't know if they've just run out of ideas or not, but I thought they'd be adding more to it. Guess we'll just have to wait and see. Though something else is that I did check printer resin on the shelf. It now adds 50 at a time. Before it was 1, and you can carry 1,000 of these things. So you can now add it to shelves. I don't know if that was fixed in the last update. I don't remember. Next is that ziplines will now have a visual harness when attaching stones or logs to the zipline. And I'm assuming planks as well. I didn't think to check that. But you just see a rope around it, so it's no longer just floating. Just a realism thing. You don't have to tie it on that. It's automatic every time you attach it. Next is that they've added a cooking pot stand for when a pot is placed on a fire to avoid it visually floating. And this is a cool change. It's a cool little stand. Looks better, makes the fire seem better. But yeah. Next is explosions will now cause break damage to all armor pieces hit. I don't know what this meant. I started to think that you take like 2 or 3 bombs and then all your armor would disappear. No, I can't figure this one out. So it removed 3 pieces of bone armor every time I got hit, regardless if it was in front of me or if I was standing on it. So I don't know what this actually means. Why would it remove 3 pieces at a time if all armor pieces are getting hit? I can't make sense of this one. Maybe just don't blow yourself up. Next is that they've added terrain anisotropic graphics setting. I don't know what this is. The fact that it's got terrain in front of it means it's probably going to affect the terrain. I've got some footage that I'll just repeat over and over again here. It's showing it with off and on high, but it affects surfaces that are parallel to the camera. So yeah, cool. Next is if player sleeps in an unprotected location, they can now sometimes be interrupted by an enemy search party. I don't know what the chance of this happen is, but I'm going to guess it's about 50% because I tested it once, I woke up, nothing. Second time, I woke up with 2 fingers near me. Now this is finally a reason for a player to build a base. I don't know what's classed as an unprotected location. Maybe you need defensive walls around you or a house walls. I don't know. Guess we're gonna have to wait and see. It used to happen in the game if there were already enemies nearby, but now it's a random encounter thing. Also talking about sleep, is that after the player sleeps, Kelvin will be found also sleeping somewhere nearby. This didn't seem to be true. I slept in these tents, and there's multiple tents here. There's 2 of them. You'd think he'd be sleeping there, but he wasn't. So maybe he needs a bed for it to happen. I don't know, but otherwise it just didn't happen. It was on the other side of the map still, after sleeping twice. Now we're moving into consumables. I've compiled these together because a lot of them work off each other. They've added a loading screen hint for drying racks placed by fire, drying things faster. Now, I didn't even know this was a thing, so I went and tested it using a drying rack right next to a fire and a drying rack about 2 foundations away. Maybe it was too close, I don't know. But after testing it, I found out that they both dried out at the same time. So maybe the fires got a warming effect of the house, I don't know. But I didn't have any walls on it, so it was confusing. But they both dried at the same time, which was about a day or something, 24 game hours. It's important to dry meats now. And the reason for that is that rotten items can no longer be used in cooking. Dried perishables will no longer go rotten, and cooked foods now take twice as long to go rot versus raw. So basically what that means is you can no longer cook with rotten items, which is what I used to always do. But if you dry the items, they will no longer go rotten because they used to. So now the incentive for drying meat is a lot higher because you can add them to the cooking pot. As for cooked foods now taking twice as long to rot versus raw, I think it just means cooking them on the fire and putting them in your inventory. I suppose that is something you can do. I don't know if you can cook dried items and make them go to a cooked item. This was done in the forest to prevent you getting the debuff from eating dried meat, which was it lowered your hydration by quite a bit, especially on hard survival. Things to test. Next thing is that cat food and oysters can now rot, and they added textures for them and new rotten textures for the meat and fish. They're no longer green like they used to be. Green was a very easy indicator, but probably not an accurate indicator. I think mold is more like white, and it reflects in the textures that they've added here. Cat food going off is not a big deal because you can just leave it in a can. However, oysters going off is going to be quite tricky because Kelvin's special is quite useful, which requires 3 fish and 1 oyster. And if your oysters are going off, well then you're kind of screwed because you can't refrigerate them and you can't store them anywhere that's going to keep them fresh. There's no refrigeration in the game. We'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Next is that eating berries while in the inventory is much faster. It is very fast. It's probably like twice the speed, maybe 3 times. I don't know if that's the same when you're not in the inventory. It's not a viable way to get food, but it is a way to get food. Before it was so slow that it was ridiculous. In real life, you could eat them much quicker. Next is that you can now add Twinberries and Snowberries to shelves. There's been a lot of changes to the way shelves work. You can even add multiple items at a time. So in the case of berries and flowers and stuff, it will add 5 at a time. So it's much faster. But as you've seen in the footage before with the resin, you can actually just press X on them once you place one and it'll probably be even faster. Once you've got a pile on there, you can just press X and add more to it. Yeah. Next is that they've added seed items for Twinberries and Snowberries, which can now be grown planters as well as mushrooms. Twinberries and Snowberries don't have much use unless you're making poison arrows, I believe, but still you might want to make them. But growing mushrooms is a bit strange because I put mushrooms in there, I waited 3 days and I only got 1 back. So basically you plant one and you get one back. I don't think the return works correctly, unless there's something I'm missing. In the forest, they used to just spread. You'd plant one in a big garden bed in a cave and they'd spread and grow more. It was kind of cool. Maybe you need to put them under shelter in this game. I don't know. Didn't mention anything about it in the update notes. Mushrooms are good for the mushroom recipe because mushrooms don't go off, and the cream of mushroom recipe only takes one of each mushroom, and it can give you 100% fullness if you drink the whole thing. Very good. Next is that they've added a new jam recipe. It relies on the icons rather than actually telling you what is actually going to go in there, but luckily you can just put a whole bunch in there. And even if you added extra, it's going to still just make the recipe and not use what you added extra. So I think it used blueberries, salmon berries, and blackberries. But it's a cool little recipe, and it looks kind of cool. Next is that the energy bar fullness is now increased from 15 to 30. This is huge. This is doubling the amount it gave, because before it was really annoying to eat them. I guess with the changes to containers no longer respawning by default, it's going to be harder to come across these things. For some reason, when I was eating my inventory, it wasn't working, but when I was eating them out of the inventory, the animation worked correctly. I don't know what that was about. And lastly, they've updated eggnog recipe to use 4 eggs. I can't remember how many eggs it used, but I think you can only carry 4 at a time now. Eggs are extremely rare to find because you have to find them from when turtles lay their eggs. They have increased the amount of turtles that there are in the game, so it might be easy to get those eggs, but you still have to go down the beach to get them. I'm thinking that they start making duck nests and then have ducks have eggs. That's what I'm thinking. Or maybe having birds' nests where they come and leave feathers, they can sometimes leave an egg. That could be a cool thing. But otherwise, eggs are just too rare to make a difference with this recipe. Also, the recipe kind of looks like piss. But that is it for this video. In part 3, I don't know what I'm mainly going to cover because I've got a lot of building changes to add, and also I've got a lot of enemy changes to add. Like the new enemies and the new builds, I just haven't even covered them yet. There's just so much. And the list of things that I'm not going to cover is up to 4 pages long. So it's not just like I'm covering everything that's been added. Believe me. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Cheers.